right, so we are going to really quickly run through speech anatomy, which we kind of already talked about that in some of the overview lectures, which is why it shouldn't take us too long to get through this lecture. Okay, so we've got three key areas that we need to talk about. One is breathing, the other is phonation, and the other is articulation. I think I have a slide on this. Yes, I do have a slide on this in a second, but I'm going to hit it again. I know we've talked about this already too, but we've got source filter model for speech. And actually, I like to talk about it as the two-source filter model. So we have a power source, which is breathing, a sound source, which is phonation, and the filter, which is the articulation or articulators. So it's two sources and one filter, and that creates speech. And it's these three things. Okay, so really quickly, we need to talk about muscles. So what way do muscles move? Only one. There's only one way that they move. So let's say we have this arm, right? Or an arm or whatever. So the muscle can only contract. That's the only thing the muscle can do. So the muscle contracts, and you can contract it more or less depending. You've got muscles back here that are going to contract to stretch it back out. So the muscle can only contract and relax, but I mean relax is kind of its default state. So it goes from default state, contract, and that's it. That's all muscles can do. So what that means is that there will never be a time when a muscle pushes out. It's going to be like a different set of muscles that will contract and extend to allow you to push. Like you can push, but that's different muscles extending. Muscles can only contract and relax. So whatever way the muscle fibers run is the direction that they're going to contract. So a lot of times in the diagrams that you'll see, there's going to be like little striations, little lines in the drawings. You can see it on this one here. There's kind of lines running in the direction that show the way that the muscle fibers go. So obviously on the arm, they're going to run this way, so they're going to contract this way. Down in the, in the forearm, they kind of run like this, so then it'll pull your hand down that way. And we'll see that there's some muscles that connect here and run along down this way to the sternum from back here behind the skull to the sternum. And those kind of go at an angle. They're kind of like a strap sort of muscle. And when those contract, it'll pull this way and pull the head straight. When they relax, when the other one pulls, it pulls it even further over. And this one pulls and comes back. And then we've got some other muscles in the neck that pull it around as well. So anyway, whatever way the muscle fibers run, that's the direction they contract. When a muscle contracts, it is going to pull on something. It's going to pull on the other muscles. So when this muscle contracts and brings it this way, it's pulling on these, stretching these muscles back here more than their typical resting state. It also kind of stretches the skin too. It can, like it says here, it can stretch skin, it can stretch tendons, it can stretch other muscles, it can stretch other tissues. We'll talk about the lungs and stuff. But so what that's going to do is that's going to set up kind of a spring-like structure. It's going to set up this elastic reaction. So if everything relaxed, even these muscles back here that are the ones that, pull this out quickly, if everything's relaxed, my arm is still going to want to kind of flop back out to where it was because of these elastic forces that are being pulled. When I pull up like this, the skin and everything is being pulled on, so it's going to want to go back to an equilibrium point. To move back quickly, so to go from here out like that, or against force, like if I'm pushing down, then the other muscles must be used. But usually to return to equilibrium, you've just got these elastic forces. That's going to be really important for the diaphragm. It's important for all muscles, but it's really important for the diaphragm, which we'll talk about very soon. So breathing is the power source for speech, and we'll see why in a second. It's an active and a passive process. And one of the ways that this works is that the lungs are not connected to the sides or the bottom of the thoracic cavity. They're only connected up at the top. So the lungs are kind of free floating in a way. They're only connected right up towards the top. Other than that, it's like a bag, sort of, two bags that can be filled with air. And it's really cool that the way that they're built, the fact that they are bags that are filled with air that are free floating and unattached to anything, they have to be that way because that's how breathing functions. I'll show you why in a second. This is a picture that I found when I looked for breathing on the internet, and I also like to think that this is like a yoga retreat, and somebody's like, no, just close your eyes and look off into the ocean, and then the person that like owns the yoga retreat is also like taking all of their wallets while they're looking off, and then they run away. When they open their eyes, they're like, where'd the yoga guy go? Okay, so the diaphragm, primary muscle of breathing, and you can see its muscle fibers right here. You can see those little striations like I was talking about. They run from the outside to the center of the diaphragm. It kind of looks like a parachute, sort of, and it's located down here below the lungs. So what's going to happen is all of the muscles, this is a round muscle, and it connects to various different parts in your body, the back, the sternum, parts of the ribs, and then it comes up from there. It like kind of pops up from there. So the muscle fibers are coming in from all of those edges to the center. And then what happens is when those muscle fibers contract, it pulls down. It pulls the entire thing down. It like flattens it like that. So what that does then is, remember, the lungs are only held right here. They're connected to these bronchioles right here, and then this goes up. This is your trachea, so this is all held in place. The lungs are held in place right here. Other than that, they're free floating. So then when your diaphragm contracts and flattens, it makes more space inside your thoracic cavity because it's flattened. It's now taking up less space. There's more space inside the thoracic cavity, negative space, which creates negative pressure. So then what that does is the pressure inside the thoracic cavity is less than the outside air. So what happens is the lungs fill up to take up that space, and the air then rushes in the mouth or the nose, or if you have, say, a tracheal tube, any opening, air is going to rush in, and it's going to fill up the lungs. So the diaphragm kind of squishes down. That's the active portion of breathing. But then everything else, the filling up of the lungs, that's all passive. That happens because of pressure differentials inside the thoracic cavity. We can do other things too. The diaphragm is the muscle. It's the most important muscle for breathing. It does a lot of the work. There's other things that can happen too. Well, here's a really quick look at what the diaphragm does. So when it's up like that, up, down, up, down, up, down. So when it's up, that's its usual resting state. And then it gets tightened. It gets pulled here, right there, right there. And that's when you're breathing in. Okay. So what this is saying here is that when you relax the diaphragm, then it starts to create less space inside the thoracic cavity. That less space is going to push on the lungs, and the air is going to come back out. Kind of like if you pushed on a balloon, the air would come out of the balloon. So like I said, the diaphragm is the main muscle. Here we go. The diaphragm is the main muscle of respiration. There are other muscles that can help it. So if you are going to breathe in very deeply You would also use rib cage muscles. You would use the sternocleidomastoid, which is the one that I was talking about that connects here on the mastoid process of the skull and then connects to the sternum and the clavicle. So that would like lift up the rib cage and create more space in there as well. Pectoral muscles, all these things. These are going to kind of like raise the rib cage and create even more space. During quiet breathing, these aren't really used. Quiet breathing is when you're just kind of like sitting and not doing anything. When you're speaking, like I just did there, I took in a large breath. That is active breathing. It's forced inspiration. So we do use these muscles when we're speaking. And then that's just for inspiration. Here we go. Here's expiration. So expiration, we know that that's when the diaphragm is relaxed. It just lets the air go. And we do that when we're speaking. A lot of times, actually, what we do when we're speaking is we allow the diaphragm to relax, but then we stop it from relaxing all the way. When we're pausing between words or pausing between sentences, it's kind of like this controlled relaxation. So it'll like that before, and then it's relaxed all the way. We can actually keep speaking after the diaphragm is relaxed all the way. The way that we do that is we tighten up the abdominal muscles and we start to kind of like force the abdominal contents up at the diaphragm, which then pushes even more air out of the lungs. So go ahead and try this really quickly, but you can kind of feel where the relaxed place is. There's no force in or out. You don't really feel like you need to breathe in or out. I mean, eventually you will, because you're not going to be breathing, but just kind of let your breath settle what feels normal. And then breathe out. You have to tighten up your abs to do that. If you breathe out all the way. So go ahead and breathe out all the way. A lot of abs, right? To get all the breath out, you're using all of your abs. Now, the other interesting thing is we can tighten up our abdominal muscles and blow all of the breath out, but there's a little bit left in there. It's a reserve capacity. That can get knocked out of you if you get hit too hard or pressure or something like that. But anyway, it's hard to do it on your own. All right, now there was a slide that I skipped over. Oh, gravity is a big thing and big portion of quiet relaxation as well, quiet breathing. The rib cage is going to fall due to gravity. We can force that if we want to with muscular contractions, but it'll fall on its own with gravity. So there's elastic forces of the diaphragm popping back up when it's relaxed, and there's gravity. These are all just kind of passive forces that aid in breathing. Let's not talk about the lungs really. They're really interesting, but it's not really necessary for speech. If you take anatomy and physiology with me, we will talk about the lungs a lot, and you'll get that then too. Okay, so this is what I was talking about with speech breathing. You can see here that this is our normal tidal breathing. This is when you're not talking, you're just sitting. Maybe right now you're listening to this lecture, you're just breathing. You could do a sustained tone, which is, boo. That's a sustained tone. And that looks a little different. You're going to take in a large breath and you're just going to make an annoying noise for a time. And then speech, like I said, you're going to take in a breath, and then it's going to have like this graded stepping motion of exhalation. So you're going to take in a large breath, so the diaphragm is going to move down, take in a large breath, and then let it out little by little when you need to make pauses. And then see that it actually dips down below the 0 point. And that's when you're using your abdominal muscles to force a little bit of extra air out. If you think about a time when you were singing or talking, and then you kind of get down to that, and you're really trying to, push more voice out and just keep going, That's when you're below the 0 point. You're using your abdominal muscles and the forced exhalation there. All right. So, how is breathing the power source? Well, we have hijacked. Do I have that in here? Oh shoot, I don't have it in here. It's in a different lecture that we'll see. Oh, it's in speech science, which is coming up soon, but it's not going to be on this exam. But essentially, we've hijacked the breathing process. We've put, and I say we, I mean evolution, I guess, has hijacked the breathing process by putting this tissue in here that allows it to kind of move into the airway, move in between when the air is escaping, and vibrate because airflow is pushing on this tissue, on the vocal folds. That's how it's the power source for speech. So you're taking a breath, vocal folds together, blah, and then you get, noise because you're putting the vocal folds together. So that's the power source. You wouldn't be able to have the vocal folds vibrate if you didn't have air flowing between them. So breathing is the power source. The actual sound source is the vocal folds, which is where we're going to go next. So right here, these are the vocal folds. It's a combination of a ligament and some muscles and some different epithelial tissue. So the vocal fold is all of that. Then you've got these vestibular folds or false vocal folds up here as well. Some people can actually talk using those. Throat singing uses both the regular vocal folds and the vestibular folds to make two different sounds at the same time. When we get to speech science, I've got a really amazing video of throat singing. It's just it's totally weird. Sorry, no, I'm thinking about throat singing. What am I talking about? So the vocal folds, like I said, we've got ligaments and muscles in here, and those are going to pull together. They're actually pulled together by these arytenoid cartilages, which you can't really see in this picture. Here we go. So these little guys here, these they kind of look like witches' teeth or witches' thumbs with these hooks on the very end of them, like weird, creepy witch nails, right? So it's like two witch thumbs, and the vocal fold is on the back of the witch thumb. So depending on how you're looking, I guess that doesn't make sense. So if you're looking at this, it kind of looks like the back of the thumb is towards you. So in that case, the vocal fold is on the front of the witch thumb. So you're gonna have these two things here. Then you've got another cartilage out here, this big shield right here. The vocal folds are gonna go from here to out to this big shield. And then what happens is those witch thumbs are going to move. They're gonna pivot at the bottom, where the bottom of the thumb would be. So they'll kind of hinge out or hinge back in, kind of like I can't really totally do it with my thumbs, but they'll hinge out. Like the points of the thumbs are going to turn out. I can do it if I move my whole hand. So they're going to move like this. This is how the witch thumbs move. Ignore the rest of my hand, focus on the thumbs. So they'll move like that. And what that does is, because you've got this vocal fold that's attached to the thumb, when it moves out, the vocal fold will move with it and move towards the outside of the throat. When the witch thumb comes together and they touch each other, then you're pulling the vocal folds together. So what happens is they're going to touch each other, and then like a balloon. Have you ever done the balloon trick where you blow up a balloon a little bit and you stretch it, and then you have the two sides that kind of vibrate together as the air comes out? That's exactly what's happening with your vocal folds. Air's moving between the two, they're vibrating together, and it creates kind of a buzzing tone. And that is the sound source for speech. This kind of like buzzing tone. Oh, shoot. My head was in the way. Sorry. So here is the vocal folds. You've got a ligament here, two different muscles here, and then you've got epithelial tissue covering the outside. So these will hinge together. Oh, could you even see the witch thumbs when I was on that, or was I in the way of that too? No, you can see the witch thumbs. Good. Okay. So anyway, like it says here, depending on how much force you're using to press the vocal folds together, that's going to change the quality of the sound. You can push more air out with your diaphragm, with the muscles, with the abs, and that's going to change the loudness. The tightness of the vocal folds together, that's going to change just the quality of the speech. It might make it more creaky or less creaky, more breathy. And then the pitch is also changed by that. I made a huge mistake when I was writing this. That's not what that should say. Ignore that point. It's not right. The pitch is actually changed by how tight the vocal folds are pulled. So if you have a vocal fold that's kind of relaxed like this or very stretched out, that's what's going to change the pitch. So they'll be relaxed and next to each other, that'll be like a low pitch. And if they're stretched or pulled very tight and pushed next to each other, that's a high pitch. So the tightness of the vocal folds together, regardless of how much or how little they're stretched, that's going to create just a change in vocal quality. How much they're stretched is going to change the pitch, and then how much air is being forced out is what's going to change the loudness. All right. So what that does is it creates a sound pressure wave. We've talked about this a bit, but you have these little puffs of air that escape the vocal folds. And what those do are they make essentially waves. Just like this. So you have areas where there's a lot more molecules, a lot more air molecules. So right after the vocal folds have opened, so you've got these multiple little pulses of air. And after it opens, you have a lot of air on the other side of the vocal folds. And that's going to move up and out of the mouth. And then you've got kind of a vacuum behind it. So open, there's a puff, and it leaves, and then there's a little bit of a vacuum. So some air is going to kind of start to rush back, but by then you've got another pulse coming out, and then it's going to move on. So then you get these alternating, a lot of air in one place or kind of a vacuum, a lot of air and kind of a vacuum. And that sets up a wave, a sound pressure wave that can move through from the vocal folds through the mouth and then out into the air, into somebody else's ear. Oh, not clicking on the right thing. We are going to focus just on a couple of these. So in the larynx, we need to know the vocal folds. Those are what touch each other. Those are what vibrate. Those are what create the actual sound. That's the sound source, the vocal folds. They're attached to the arytenoid cartilage. Those are the witch thumbs. The thyroid cartilage is this large shield-like one right here. And then the cricoid cartilage is what the witch thumbs sit on. So the thyroid cartilage moving forward, kind of like rocking forward, is what's going to create a change in pitch. The cricoid cartilage is locked in place. It doesn't move. But the thyroid cartilage will move on it. And then that stretching between from here to here, that's how much the vocal folds are going to be stretched. And that's what creates a change in pitch. Let's see. What else do I want to say about this? Do I want to say anything about this? Yes, I do. Okay, so you can actually feel this. So go ahead and do this. But if you... yeah, okay. So you can either move up or down. What you want to do is you want to find this lump in your throat. If you're a guy, it'll be a little easier to find. They're typically more pronounced, although there's a lot of variance in, people. So it's not, some women will have a really pronounced one, some guys won't. It's not super pronounced, but you'll find that lump, and then you can move up, and you'll touch a groove, and what you're touching there is this groove right here. So see how this shield kind of moves and goes down and then comes back up and then comes this way. It's actually symmetrical. This view is kind of weird. If you want to move down, start at the very end of your chin and move down until you find a groove. Once you find that groove, you're touching your thyroid cartilage. So then what you can do is you can like change your pitch, and you can feel it move. You get lower, or kind of higher. You can feel it move. Go ahead and try swallowing right then. You'll be able to feel the whole larynx is going to move up. There's a lot of cool things you can do just by feeling right there. But you're basically touching the larynx at this point when you have your finger in that groove. If you go a little up and back, you'll feel something hard. That's the hyoid bone. That's where your tongue hooks in. It's a pretty crazy. It's interesting to feel all that stuff moving. Okay, so then we have articulation and resonation, and that all happens from the vocal folds all the way up. So the vocal folds up is going to be the pharynx. So that's kind of from here to here. It's the throat, and then kind of like behind the nose area, that's the pharynx. You've got the oral cavity, or the mouth, and then you've got the nasal cavity. And those are the three areas where all of the resonance and articulation actually happens. So what's leaving your larynx is just kind of, like I said, like a buzz. It kind of sounds like that. That's what's leaving the actual vocal folds. You can change its pitch, but you really can't change the fact that it just kind of sounds like a really annoying fire alarm. Like when you're in grade school and you have fire alarm drills, that's what it kind of sounds like. The way that you do change that to sound more like, a voice and more like actually saying different words is the shape of the pharynx. So we have muscles and that are going to pull on different tissues. To change the shape of the pharynx, it'll get more condensed, it'll get wider for different vowels. The tongue placement, so if you say ooh, you can feel that your lips are being used to kind of extend the mouth area, ooh. They kind of come out a little bit. Think about where your tongue is when you say ooh, though. Ooh. It's down in front and it's kind of pushing up in the back. Ooh. So now go E. E. That's ooh, E. That's not a great example. It kind of doesn't change really. What changes your lips in that case? Let's see. E. I. Oh. I. E. I. There we go. E and I. So say I. Notice where your tongue is. I feels about mid-level, pretty flat. Now say E, and your tongue has popped up a bit. It's closer to the top of your mouth. So that's the difference that moving your tongue around can make. It'll change the sound from an I to an E. I mean, that's really the basis of all of our vowels, is just like the size of the pharynx, the size and shape of the oral cavity. And a lot of our consonants too. We've got some pseudo consonants, some nasals that basically are just differences in size and shape of all of our articulators. So think about and What's really the difference there? Well, one, you have your lips closed, and one, you use your tongue up against the roof of your mouth. But that's kind of the same thing. Really, all you're doing is shortening the length of the oral cavity, right? I mean, all of your air is actually coming out of your nose. So the only change is how how much air is actually able to go into the mouth cavity and resonate around in there before it comes out the nose. So the change of an to an is just as simple as, I mean, you can make an with your mouth closed, right? So if you close your mouth and then say but with your mouth closed, it's still and then say like ing, and that's just, you're shortening that area again. You're putting your tongue at the very back of your mouth. So you can go you can still make an with your mouth shut in that way too. Ing works. So that's resonance and articulation. That's what's going on there. Some things that we haven't talked about are, different places where these can happen for consonants. So we'll talk about that really quickly, but say button, think about butter and then think about button. And those are both T's. They're very similar words, really. Butter, button, butter, and button. There's two totally different things that we do with the T, though. One, we kind of hit the tongue. You kind of slap the tongue against the roof of the mouth for butter. And then for button, it's in the back of the throat. It's a glottal stop. So it doesn't have the characteristics of a T really at all. Button. Although then when you really try to enunciate it to somebody, like I just accidentally did for you guys, I will say button, which sounds crazy. That's not really how we usually say it, and it changes the way that the T is said. So, but the regular type of button is a glottal stop all the way back here. You've got velar, which is k. The velum is what closes off when you're usually talking. It opens up when you say a nasal, so like M, N, or ing. That's the velum that's opening and closing there. So you've got K's, k, which are kind of made on the velum. You're pushing your tongue up against the velum to make that. You've got also alveolar, which is your typical T, T. The alveolar ridge is the ridge that's right, I say in front of the teeth, but I'm actually feeling like maybe I should have said behind, because we're thinking about, I guess I was thinking about the way that air comes up, its pattern of movement, then it's in front of the teeth. But if we're talking about from out here in a face going back, then it's behind. But it's this ridge right. Oh, my head's in the way again. Okay. The alveolar ridge is this right here, behind the teeth, in front of the teeth. I guess it depends on what your reference frame is, but that's the alveolar ridge. And that's where you're going to say T. And then you've also got dentals. Those are on the teeth like th, right? So all these different places make different sounds. And that is resonance and articulation. And that is the end of our speech anatomy lecture. There's quite a few more. We're going to talk about how speech develops. That's coming up next. Then we're going to talk about autism in children. It's one of my favorite lectures. It's not one of mine. I'm not giving it, but it's definitely one of the ones that I like to watch the best. And then after that, I'm going to come back and talk to you about autism in adults. All right, see you soon.